I grew up in a household where politics was often discussed around the kitchen and dining room table. Invariably, it was my father either yelling at the television or bemoaning Hawke-era economics, if you like. And so it was a discussion and a frequent one. But it was one that was not always well informed. And as I studied law and economics, I came to a stronger and better understanding. And pleased to say not much has changed at home. I often go home for a bit of respite and my dad's still yelling at the television. But I think that's given me what I think is my great skill in this place, and that is to bring a common touch to difficult policy discussions. The reality is that our job is to represent the 24 million Australians in this place, and whilst I believe you need a basic level of capacity, I think we're best represented when we come from across the broad spectrum. And there are some people in here who are intellectual giants, there are Rhodes Scholars, but there are others who are just so deeply in touch with the Australian psyche, in particular Middle Australia, that I think they bring to discussions an earthy realism, which is really valuable. I spend every weekend at a country footy game. I serve on either the barbecue or the can shed. Equality advice gets better the longer the day goes, but the reality is people tell you exactly what irks them. And it's very rarely the idiosyncratic issues that excite Canberra elite or indeed the Canberra Press Gallery. It's much more readily real issues. So I was someone who more than 2 years ago came to this very party room and said, look, colleagues, I'm really concerned about the price of electricity. I've now got people talking to me about it daily, and they're saying they can't afford it. And they're talking to me about their production systems in agriculture and the fact that we now have a river that's full of water following the millennium drought, but nobody can afford to lift the water because the price of electricity is just catastrophically high. It was 6 or 9 months later that we had a blackout in South Australia, and then colleagues were saying to me, well, how did you know? Well, I knew because I'm out in community and I'm attending events that I'm not necessarily invited to. So you're not necessarily getting the usual suspects who are in local government or community organisations. We're getting the real punter who comes up and asks for a Great Northern stubby, and then while he's there goes, oi, aren't you the politician? Mate, I've always wanted to say this. And that's how I keep in touch. We need to remember that very many people come to this country and deliver significantly for themselves, but also our nation. And I think that's why, in terms of immigration policy, we should always be looking for those people who want to join Team Australia, who want to strengthen Australia, not change it, but in particular want to deliver for themselves and their families. Back to my maiden speech, I said that I'm a supporter of orderly migration into our country, rules-based, and my parents were beneficiaries of that. I'm an Australian because of that, but you throw that into significant jeopardy when you effectively allow unauthorised arrivals to come to our country. The capacity to welcome 55,000 and indeed resettle 55,000 humanitarian refugees over the last 3 years is because we've been able to maintain strong borders. Now, that's why I support orderly immigration policy. It's why I mentioned it in my maiden speech, and it's why I believe in it so deeply, because it is in fact the fairest and most compassionate way to deal with what is a global problem with displaced people. I hate the phrase un-Australian, but I don't think anything could be less Australian than to seek to advantage yourself by coming to Australia unlawfully in circumstances where people are lawfully waiting in UNHCR camps, often up to 10 years, to enjoy the liberties and freedoms we do in this country. Well, look, I don't believe in the concept of multiculturalism. I know that's very anti-PC, but I believe in multiracialism. I'm Italian by race. I certainly can't choose that. I'm proud of that cultural heritage, but I'm Australian by choice. And there can't be, in my view, competing cultures in a nation like Australia. We are all Australian. It's the reason we celebrate Australia Day, it's the reason we commemorate Anzac Day. And to suggest there can be competing cultures operating inside one sovereign state, in my view, is incongruent, I think it's academically dishonest. And I think we're strongest when we understand and respect the fact that we're one united Australia, drawn from the four corners of the earth, a multitude of different races, hence the phrase multiracialism, but those races inform our culture, and that is Australian culture. There can only be one culture, and that's Australia.